woman once lost her marriage, not because of betrayal, not because of lies, but because of a moment so small, she didn't even realize it mattered. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a decision anyone would question. It was breakfast, and the truth is, if she had just made a different choice that morning, everything that followed might have changed. Welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where we don't just tell stories. We uncover the quiet decisions that shape our lives. If you're new here, you're in the right place. And if you've ever wondered how something small, something almost invisible, can slowly change the direction of a relationship, then this story is for you. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this, they don't just entertain you, they stay with you. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever avoided a small moment? Not because it was wrong, but because it felt uncomfortable. Have you ever chosen silence instead of honesty, just to keep things smooth? Most people have, and that's exactly where this story begins, not with a mistake, but with a pattern, a quiet habit of choosing what feels easier, instead of what's true. And one morning, without realizing it, that habit met love. The first thing Ava felt when she opened her eyes wasn't peace. It was resistance, not emotional, physical, the kind that sat heavy in her stomach, rising slowly like something her body didn't agree with. Morning sickness, the doctor had called it, like it was a small, predictable inconvenience. But there was nothing small about it. It changed how she woke up, how she moved, how she thought. Even the air felt different lately. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the wave to pass. It didn't. It never did, not completely. This was her new normal, and she hadn't fully accepted it yet. From the hallway, she heard movement. Soft, controlled, intentional. Daniel. He was always awake before her, but not like this. His mornings were usually quiet in a different way. Emails, calls, early meetings, structured silence. But today, there was something else, a faint clink. The sound of a pan. Cabinet doors opening, closing. Ava frowned slightly. That was new. She pushed herself up slowly, one hand resting on her stomach, steadying the dizziness before it fully hit. Okay, she whispered under her breath. We're doing this today. She stood, careful, measured. By the time she reached the bedroom door, the smell reached her first. Eggs. Her stomach turned instantly. She froze. That was all it took. Just the smell. And suddenly, the idea of facing whatever was happening in that kitchen felt like more effort than she had. She could go back to bed. She could pretend she hadn't noticed. She could let the moment pass. And for a second, she almost did. But then, she heard his voice. Hey. She looked up. Daniel stood just outside the doorway, sleeves rolled up, like he wasn't entirely comfortable in his own effort. There was something unfamiliar about him like this. Less composed. Less certain. I didn't want to wake you, he said. But, you're up. Ava nodded faintly. Yeah. He hesitated. Then, with the smallest shift in tone, he added, I made something. That landed differently than it should have. Not because of what he said, but because of what it meant. Daniel didn't make something. Daniel arranged things, organized things, provided things. But this was personal. I looked it up, he continued, almost defensively. They said ginger helps, and light food, so he gestured slightly, like explaining too much might make it worse. And for a moment, Ava didn't know what to do with that. This version of him. This effort, this quiet attempt to meet her somewhere he didn't naturally exist. I don't know if I can eat, she said honestly, her voice softer than she expected. He nodded quickly. That's fine. I mean, you don't have to. I just thought, if you wanted to try, there it was. No pressure, no expectation, just presence. And somehow, that made it harder, because now, the choice mattered, more than it should have. She could say no. It would be reasonable, logical, even expected. But something in his expression stopped her. Not hope, not even anticipation, just effort. And Ava had always struggled with effort that came quietly, because it demanded something in return. She swallowed lightly. Okay, she said. You can bring it. It wasn't a big decision. Not yet. Just a small yes. One that felt harmless. One that felt manageable. Daniel nodded once, almost relieved, and turned back toward the kitchen. Ava stepped aside, letting him pass. And as she did, she told herself something she had always believed. This doesn't have to be a big deal. But what she didn't realize was, the moments we think don't matter are usually the ones that change everything. A few minutes later, the tray sat in front of her, carefully arranged, too carefully. Scrambled eggs, toast cut neatly, a small bowl of fruit placed like it had a purpose, and the tea, ginger. He really had looked it up. Ava stared at it. then at him. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. But meaning something, and being able to receive it, those were two very different things. "Just try a little," Daniel said gently. "If you can." She nodded, picked up the fork, paused. Her stomach tightened again. Not violently, just enough. Enough to warn her. Enough to remind her. She lowered the fork slightly. Daniel didn't say anything, didn't rush her, didn't fix it. He just stood there, waiting. And suddenly, the moment felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the food, but because of what it represented. Effort, expectation, connection. And Ava wasn't sure she knew how to hold all of that. Not without making it complicated, not without risking discomfort. And that's when the familiar thought slipped in. The one that had guided so many of her decisions before this one. There's an easier way to handle this. And just like that, the real choice wasn't whether to eat the breakfast. It was whether to be honest about why she couldn't. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a moment like this, where telling the truth felt heavier than staying quiet? If you have, I want you to drop a comment below. Just say, "I've been there." Because what Ava is about to do next is something a lot of people do, and almost no one realizes the cost of it. Ava forced a small breath, lifted the fork again. And this time, she made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a loud one, just a quiet shift that would follow her longer than she expected. The fork didn't make it to her mouth. It stopped halfway. Ava felt it before anything else. The shift in her stomach, the tightening in her throat, the quiet warning her body had learned to give before things got worse. She lowered the fork slowly. "Yeah," she murmured, almost to herself. "I can't." Daniel didn't react immediately. He didn't sigh, didn't look disappointed, didn't say "I knew it." He just nodded once, like he had already prepared for this outcome. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to force it." And that should have made it easier. But somehow, it didn't. Because now the moment wasn't about pressure. It was about response, about what came next. Ava stared at the plate again. The eggs were still warm, the tea untouched, the toast perfectly placed like something that had been thought through more than necessary. He had tried, not in his usual way, not with money or structure or solutions, but with time, with attention. And that made it heavier, because Ava didn't just struggle with discomfort, she struggled with receiving effort she couldn't return. She started, then stopped. Daniel waited. She searched for something, anything, that would make this moment simpler, cleaner, less emotional. "I'll leave it for later," she finished. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. And Daniel, who had built his life around precision, seemed to recognize that difference, even if he didn't call it out. "Okay," he said quietly. He didn't push, didn't question. He just stepped back slightly, giving her space. And in that space, Ava felt something she wasn't expecting. Not relief, but distance. A few minutes later, Daniel had already shifted back into his routine. A call, a message, a quiet conversation with someone in the hallway. The version of him that handled things, the version that didn't linger. Ava sat alone with the tray. The room was quiet again, too quiet. She looked at the food one more time, tried to convince herself to take a bite, just one, to meet him halfway, but the moment she leaned in slightly, the smell hit her again, stronger this time. Her stomach twisted. "Nope," she whispered quickly, pulling back. That was it. She couldn't. And now, the question wasn't if she would eat it. It was what she would do with it. She glanced toward the door. Still open, still easy, still offering her the same choice she had made her entire life. Redirect it. Don't make it awkward. Don't make it emotional. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be. Just handle it, quietly, efficiently, the way she always had. Ava stood carefully, lifting the tray with both hands. It felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but in a way she couldn't quite explain. The hallway was calm. Soft footsteps, distant voices, the quiet rhythm of a home that functioned without needing attention. Ava walked slowly, steadying herself once, when a wave of nausea passed through her again. She could turn back. That thought crossed her mind briefly. She could go back into the room, set the tray down, tell Daniel the truth. "I can't eat it. I tried, but I can't." It wasn't hard. It wasn't complicated. It was just direct. And that was exactly why it felt difficult. Because direct meant vulnerable. Direct meant allowing the moment to exist fully. And Ava had spent years learning how to soften moments before they reached that point. So instead, she kept walking. Lila was near the main hallway, standing beside a narrow console table, scrolling through something on her tablet. Efficient, focused, always composed. She looked up as Ava approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale." Her tone was polite, professional, but warm enough to feel human. Ava adjusted her grip slightly on the tray. "Morning, Lila." There was a brief pause, just long enough for the situation to register. Lila's eyes flicked to the tray, then back to Ava. Waiting. Ava hesitated. This was the moment. Small, simple, easily overlooked. She could still change it. She could say, actually, never mind. She could turn around. She could choose honesty. Instead, she stepped forward. "I can't eat this," she said quietly. "Would you mind taking it?" Lila blinked. Just once. Not surprised exactly, but aware. There was something in that pause. Something subtle. Something that noticed more than Ava intended to show. "Of course," Lila said, recovering smoothly as she reached the tray. Their hands almost overlapped for a second, then didn't. The transfer was quick, clean, efficient, just like Ava preferred. "Thank you," Ava added. "You're welcome." And that was it. No questions, no discomfort, no scene. Just a problem solved. Exactly the way Ava liked it. As she turned to walk back to her room, she felt it again. That quiet sense of relief. The kind that came from avoiding something before it became complicated. "See?" she told herself. Handled. No tension. No awkward conversation. No need to explain something that didn't need explaining. Everything stayed smooth. Everything stayed easy. And for a moment, that felt like success. But down the hallway, just out of her direct line of sight, Lila didn't move immediately. She stood there with the tray in her hands, her expression thoughtful in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Not judgmental. Just observant. Because she understood something Ava didn't. In homes like this, structured, intentional, carefully balanced, small actions carried weight. Not because of what they were, but because of what they meant. And this meant something. Ava didn't see that. She returned to her room, closed the door softly behind her, and sat back down on the bed. The space felt the same as before. Quiet, controlled, uncomplicated. But something had shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to exist. She lay back slowly, one hand resting on her stomach again. The nausea hadn't passed. But something else had taken its place. A thought, one she didn't fully form, one she didn't stay with long enough to understand. That felt off, but instead of exploring it, she let it go, like she always did, because Ava had built her life on a simple belief: if something doesn't feel good, fix it quietly or move past it quickly. And for years, that belief had worked. It had kept her relationships calm, her environment stable, her life manageable. But what she hadn't realized was, it had also kept her distant, from conflict, from discomfort, from truth, and sometimes, from the people who were trying to get close to her. Later that afternoon, Daniel passed through the kitchen. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just moving through, but he noticed the tray, not because it was there, but because of where it was, half cleared, untouched in the way that said something had been decided without him. He paused, just briefly, then looked toward Lila. "Did she eat?" he asked. Lila hesitated. "Not long, but long enough." "No," she said carefully. "She wasn't able to." Daniel nodded once. That made sense. But something about the situation didn't sit the way it should have. "And the tray?" he asked. "She asked me to take it," Lila replied. Another pause. This one heavier, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A slight shift, a recalibration. "All right," he said finally, and then he walked away. That evening, nothing exploded. No confrontation, no raised voices, no dramatic shift. Just dinner. Quiet. Polite. Carefully balanced. The way their marriage had always been. Ava asked about his day. Daniel answered. Daniel asked about her appointment. Ava responded. Everything. Normal. And yet, something underneath it had changed. Not broken. Not damaged. Just noticed. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. Because the truth is, it wasn't about the breakfast. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't even about Lila. It was about something much smaller and much more dangerous. A pattern. One that had gone unnoticed for years. One that turned honesty into inconvenience and distance into normal. And now, for the first time, that pattern had been seen. And once something is seen, it can't be unseen. Before we continue, let me ask you something again. Have you ever handled a situation so smoothly that you didn't realize you were actually avoiding something important? If that's ever been you, drop a comment. I didn't see it then. Because in the next chapter, you're going to understand exactly why Ava made that choice, and why it's not as simple as it looks. Before we go into the next chapter, I want to ask you something honestly. Have you ever avoided a small moment like this? Not because it didn't matter, but because it felt easier? And later, you realized it meant more than you thought. If you've ever been there, type, "I've done this too." And if this story is already making you think differently about the little things in your life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because what happens next? It goes deeper than you expect. Not every habit begins with a decision. Some begin as protection. Long before Ava became the kind of woman who handed difficult moments to someone else, she was a little girl who learned very quickly what happened when you didn't. The house she grew up in wasn't loud. That's what people always got wrong. There were no constant arguments, no shouting matches echoing through the walls, no doors slamming hard enough to shake the windows. From the outside, it looked calm, peaceful even. But inside, silence wasn't comfort. It was tension waiting for a place to land. Ava learned that before she even understood what tension was. She learned it in the way her mother moved through the kitchen. Quiet, careful, like every sound had to be measured. She learned it in the way her father spoke, controlled, precise, choosing his words like mistakes had consequences. And she learned it most clearly in the moments right before something small became something big. Because in her house, problems didn't explode. They built, quietly, slowly, until one wrong word, one honest reaction, one moment of not holding back, and everything shifted. Ava was 8 the first time she noticed it. Not the argument itself, but the before. Her mother had burned dinner slightly. Nothing serious. Just enough for the smell to linger. Ava remembered standing near the doorway, watching as her mother scraped the edges of the pan, trying to fix it before her father came home. "It's fine," her mother whispered to herself. "It's fine," but Ava could hear it in her voice. It wasn't fine. And when the front door opened, everything changed. Not immediately. That's what made it confusing. Her father walked in like he always did. Calm, predictable. He greeted them both, washed his hands, sat down. And for a few minutes, everything was normal. Until it wasn't. It started with a comment. Not harsh, not even loud, just honest. "This tastes different." That was all. But Ava saw it. The shift in her mother's posture, the slight tightening in her shoulders, the way her voice changed when she responded. It's the same recipe. It wasn't about the food anymore. And somehow, Ava understood that. Even at 8 years old, she didn't know how. She just felt it. What came next wasn't shouting. It was worse. It was correction, explanation, justification, back and forth. Calm voices, controlled tones. But underneath it, something was breaking. And Ava sat there frozen, her small hands gripping the edge of her chair, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Because from where she was sitting, it didn't seem like a big deal. It was just dinner, just a comment, just honesty. So why did it feel like everything was falling apart? That night, she learned her first lesson. Not from what was said, but from what it caused. Honesty created tension. Tension created discomfort. Discomfort changed everything. And somewhere in her young mind, a quiet conclusion formed. If you can avoid the moment that starts it, you can avoid everything that follows. She didn't say it out loud. Didn't even realize she believed it. But she started living it. In small ways at first. Harmless ways. Her teacher once asked if she understood a lesson. She didn't, but she nodded anyway. Because asking questions meant attention. And attention felt like pressure. So she smiled and said, yes, it worked. No one pushed further. No one noticed. No tension. At home, it became even clearer. She started watching closely, learning patterns, noticing what triggered shifts in the room. Certain words, certain tones, certain truths. And slowly, she adjusted. She spoke less when things felt uncertain. Agreed more when conversations felt fragile. Smoothed things over before they had a chance to sharpen. And something interesting happened. Things stayed calm, not perfect, but controlled, predictable, safe. And, for a child, that felt like success. By the time she was a teenager, it wasn't something she thought about anymore. It was just who she was, the easy one, the understanding one, the one who didn't make things complicated. Friends liked that about her. Teachers appreciated it. Even her parents, in their own way, relied on it. She's never difficult, her mother would say. And Ava wore that like something to be proud of. Because in her world, being difficult meant being the reason things went wrong. And she had no interest in being that. But what Ava didn't understand yet was the cost. Because every time she chose silence over honesty, Every time she redirected instead of expressed, every time she made something smaller so it wouldn't grow, she was also making herself smaller, bit by bit, choice by choice, until one day, she wouldn't even notice the difference. The first time someone called her easy to love, she smiled. It was meant as a compliment, and she accepted it that way. But what they really meant was, she didn't challenge, didn't confront, didn't disrupt, and in the beginning, that made relationships feel effortless. No arguments, no tension, no complications, just smooth, steady connection. The kind people said they wanted, the kind Ava believed was right. But ease isn't the same as depth, and peace isn't the same as honesty. Those were lessons she hadn't learned yet. Not then. Years later, sitting on the edge of her bed with a breakfast tray she couldn't eat, those same patterns were still guiding her, still shaping her choices, still convincing her that the best way to handle discomfort was to quietly remove it, not realizing she wasn't removing the problem. She was removing herself from the moment. And the truth is, when you do that long enough, people stop knowing where you really stand, what you really feel, who you really are. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Did you grow up in a place where keeping the peace felt more important than telling the truth? Where silence felt safer than honesty? If you did, just type, "I learned this too," because what Ava is carrying into her marriage is something a lot of people don't even realize they've been taught. And in the next part, you're going to see how those small habits followed her into adulthood and quietly shaped every relationship she thought was working. By the time Ava reached her mid-20s, her life looked easy, not perfect, not extraordinary, just smooth. And that was exactly how she liked it. She had a stable job, a small but well-kept apartment, a circle of friends who described her the same way everyone always had. Easy to be around, low stress, no drama. It sounded like success. And in many ways it was. Because Ava had mastered something most people struggled with, she knew how to make herself fit into conversations, into expectations, into relationships that required more adjustment than expression. And she did it so naturally, no one ever questioned it, not even her. Her first serious relationship started the same way most of her relationships did, effortlessly. His name was Marcus. He wasn't complicated. He wasn't intense. He wasn't the kind of man who challenged her in ways that made her uncomfortable. And that made him safe. They met through mutual friends, started talking, and within weeks everything just worked. No tension, no confusion, no difficult conversations. If something felt slightly off, Ava adjusted before it became noticeable. If Marcus said something she didn't fully agree with, she smiled and let it pass. If plans didn't align with what she actually wanted, she shifted. It wasn't sacrifice. At least, that's not how she saw it. It was maintenance, keeping things smooth, keeping things good. And for a while, it worked. "Being with you is easy," Marcus told her once, lying beside her on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Ava smiled. That word again. Easy. She leaned into it. "Isn't that a good thing?" she asked. "It is," he said. "No stress, no complications. Just peace, peace." She liked that word. It felt like validation, like confirmation that everything she had learned growing up was right. That love wasn't supposed to feel heavy, or difficult, or uncertain. It was supposed to feel like this. Light, predictable, controlled. And because of that belief, she never questioned what was missing, until the day Marcus made a decision without her. It wasn't a big one. At least, not on the surface. He accepted a job in another city, better opportunity, higher pay, a clear step forward. And when he told her, he didn't sound unsure. He sounded confident. "I think this is the right move," he said. Ava nodded slowly. Okay, that was it. No hesitation, no resistance, no questions, just... Oh, Marcus watched her for a moment, like he was waiting for something else. But nothing came. "You're good with that?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, offering a small smile. Of course, and in that moment, she believed it. Because saying anything else would have made things complicated, would have introduced tension, would have required a conversation she didn't know how to have. So she stayed consistent, supportive, understanding, easy. He left 2 months later, and for a while, they tried to make it work. Calls, messages, occasional visits, everything still smooth on the surface, but something underneath it had changed. Not because of distance, but because of absence. Not just physical absence, but emotional presence. Because for the first time, Ava started to feel something she wasn't used to, uncertainty. And instead of addressing it, she did what she always did. She adjusted, spoke less about what she felt, focused more on keeping things stable, avoided anything that might create pressure. And slowly, the relationship faded, not with a fight, not with a clear ending, just distance. When it finally ended, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet, like something that had already been over for a while. "I just think we want different things," Marcus said over the phone. Ava nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yeah," she replied. "I think so too." There it was again. Agreement. Ease. No conflict. No closure. Just a smooth exit. After the call ended, Ava sat still for a long time. Not crying, not angry. Just thinking. Because something about it didn't feel right. Not the breakup itself, but how it happened. Or more accurately, how it didn't happen. No confrontation, no expression, no real conversation about what had been missing. Just two people, slowly drifting apart, without ever fully acknowledging it. And for the first time, Ava wondered something she had never allowed herself to ask before. Did I actually say what I needed? The answer came quickly. No, she hadn't. But the more uncomfortable truth was, she didn't even know what she needed. That realization didn't change her overnight. It didn't suddenly make her more expressive or confrontational. It just stayed with her, quietly, like a question she hadn't answered yet. In the months that followed, she told herself something simple. Next time will be different. Not dramatically different, just slightly more aware, slightly more present, slightly more honest. And when she met Daniel, she believed that was enough. Because Daniel didn't require the same kind of adjustment, at least not in the beginning. He was clear, direct, structured. There was no guessing with him, no emotional confusion, no unstable ground. And that felt refreshing, safe, in a different way. With Marcus, she had maintained peace. With Daniel, peace already existed, or so it seemed. Their conversations were efficient, their decisions aligned easily, their life moved forward without friction. And for Ava, that felt like growth, like she had finally found something that didn't require her to constantly manage the emotional atmosphere. But what she didn't see was that she was still doing it, just more subtly, less obviously, and in a way that blended perfectly with Daniel's world. Because Daniel didn't push for emotional depth, he valued clarity, solutions, stability, and Ava fit into that system seamlessly. She didn't challenge unnecessarily, didn't complicate situations, didn't introduce emotional unpredictability. To him, that wasn't avoidance. It was compatibility, and to her, it felt like success. But compatibility built on silence is fragile, because it only works as long as nothing requires more than surface agreement. And now, years later, sitting in that same marriage, pregnant, uncomfortable, and quietly overwhelmed, Ava was beginning to face something she had avoided her entire life. What happens when you can't adjust? When your body refuses to cooperate, your emotions become harder to ignore, and the person beside you starts expecting something more real. Because the truth is, Ava didn't just hand off a breakfast tray. She handed off a moment of connection, one she didn't know how to hold, one she had never been taught to hold. And Daniel, for the first time, he noticed. Before we move into the next chapter, I want you to think about this. Have you ever been in a relationship where everything felt fine, but looking back, you realize you weren't fully present? If that's you, type, I stayed quiet too. Because in the next chapter, we're going to see exactly how Ava and Daniel's relationship was built, and why something that looked so stable on the outside was already missing something important. Ava didn't fall in love with Daniel the way people usually describe love. There was no rush, no overwhelming chemistry, no moment where everything suddenly felt out of control. What she felt instead was clarity, and for someone like Ava, clarity felt like destiny. They met in a setting that matched him perfectly, structured, intentional, efficient. A corporate fundraising event in downtown Chicago. Ava hadn't planned to stay long. She wasn't even supposed to attend originally. Her coworker had cancelled last minute, and she stepped in because it felt easier than explaining why she didn't want to go. That had always been her pattern. Say yes, adjust later. And that night, that small yes placed her directly in Daniel Hale's world. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. Didn't need to be. There was something about him that drew attention without effort. Not charm. Not charisma. Control. He spoke with purpose. Listened with focus. Moved like someone who understood exactly where he was going, and didn't waste energy proving it. People respected that. Ava noticed it immediately. Not because it impressed her, but because it felt steady, predictable, in a way that didn't require guessing. And after years of navigating emotional uncertainty in quieter ways, that steadiness felt like relief. Their first conversation wasn't memorable in the way most people expect. No sparks, no tension, no lingering pause that hinted at something deeper. Just ease. He asked what she did. She told him. He followed up with questions that made sense, not intrusive, not shallow, focused. And when she answered, he actually listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak, not just nodding politely. He processed. That was new. You're very clear, he said at one point. Ava tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? You don't overcomplicate your answers, he explained. Most people do. She smiled faintly. I guess I just say what makes sense. And in that moment, she believed that. She didn't realize that what he was seeing as clarity was actually simplicity shaped by avoidance. Daniel appreciated efficiency, not just in business, in life. He believed that unnecessary conflict was a result of poor communication, that problems could be solved if both people approached them logically. Emotion to him wasn't something to avoid, but it wasn't something to sit in either. It was something to understand and move through, and Ava, without realizing it, fit perfectly into that framework. She didn't challenge his pace, didn't introduce emotional unpredictability, didn't complicate conversations with things she wasn't sure how to express. To Daniel, that felt like alignment. They started seeing each other a week later, not because of some dramatic pull, but because it made sense. Schedules aligned, conversations flowed. There were no obstacles, and for both of them, that felt like the right kind of beginning. Their dates were consistent, planned in advance, executed smoothly, free from uncertainty. Daniel chose places carefully. Ava showed up on time. They talked, learned about each other, and moved forward. There was no confusion about where things were going. And that was the part Ava liked the most. No guessing, no wondering if he cared, no analyzing mixed signals. With Daniel, everything was clear. You don't make things complicated, he told her one evening over dinner. Ava looked down at her glass for a second, then back at him. I don't see the point in making things harder than they need to be. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Agreement, alignment, efficiency. Everything working exactly the way it should. But what neither of them questioned was what wasn't happening. Ava never told him about the things that made her hesitate. The small uncertainties she felt but couldn't quite name. The moments where she almost said something, but didn't. And Daniel never noticed. Because from his perspective, everything was functioning perfectly. No issues raised, no concerns expressed, no friction. And, in his world, that meant success. A few months into their relationship, Daniel did something that confirmed everything Ava believed about him. He showed up when it mattered. Her car had broken down late in the evening, leaving her stranded outside a grocery store. She called a service first, then a friend, but neither option worked out quickly. So, almost as an afterthought, she called Daniel, not expecting much, not wanting to inconvenience him. He picked up immediately. Where are you? She told him. I'll be there in 15 minutes. No hesitation. No complaint. Just action. And he was. 15 minutes later, his car pulled up, calm and precise as everything else about him. He stepped out, assessed the situation, made a call, and within minutes, everything was handled. Tow truck arranged, ride secured, problem solved. Ava sat in the passenger seat afterward, watching the city pass by, feeling something settle inside her. Not excitement, not passion, but certainty. This is someone I can rely on. And, to her, that mattered more than anything else. You didn't have to come, she said quietly. Daniel glanced at her briefly. Of course I did. She hesitated. I just didn't want to bother you. You didn't, he replied. If something needs to be handled, you handle it. Simple, logical, clear. And Ava leaned into that, because it meant she didn't have to ask for more, didn't have to explain herself, didn't have to risk being misunderstood. That night, she made a decision, not a loud one, not one she announced, just a quiet conclusion she carried forward. This is what love should feel like. Not overwhelming, not uncertain, not complicated, just reliable. And Daniel? He made his own quiet conclusion. Ava is easy to build with, not because she lacked depth, but because she didn't resist the structure he naturally created. And to him, that felt like partnership. Months passed. Their relationship progressed, naturally, predictably, efficiently, and before long, they were talking about the future, not in emotional terms, but in practical ones, where they would live, how they would structure their time, what made the most sense. And every conversation ended the same way. Agreement. Do you see any issues with this? Daniel asked once, reviewing a potential housing option. Ava looked over the details. Location, space, convenience, Everything aligned. No, she said. It makes sense. And again, she believed it, because nothing in the plan felt wrong. But something remained unspoken. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in something that made perfect sense on paper, but you never stopped to ask how it actually felt? If you have, type, it made sense. Because in the next part, you're going to see how Ava and Daniel built a life that looked exactly right, and why that made it so hard to notice what was missing. The proposal didn't come with a surprise. No hidden cameras. No orchestrated moment designed to overwhelm her. Daniel didn't believe in that. He believed in timing. They were sitting in his living room one evening, a quiet space overlooking the city, clean lines, neutral tones, everything in its place. Ava had grown used to that space. It reflected him perfectly. Nothing unnecessary. Nothing out of control. Nothing left undefined. Daniel set his glass down, turned slightly toward her, and said, "I think we should get married." No build-up. No dramatic pause. Just a statement. Clear. Direct. Certain. Ava blinked once, processing it. Not because she was shocked, but because of how straightforward it was. "You think we should?" she asked, a small smile forming. "Yes," he said. "We align on values. Our lives are compatible. There's no reason to delay something that makes sense." There it was again. That word, sense. And for Ava, that mattered. Because love, to her, had never been about intensity. It had always been about stability, about choosing something that worked, something that didn't create problems, something that didn't require constant emotional negotiation. And Daniel was the clearest choice she had ever seen. "Okay," she said, just like that. No hesitation, no long internal debate. Just agreement. He studied her for a moment, as if confirming something. "You're sure?" he asked. Ava nodded. "Yeah. I am." And again, she believed it, because everything about them felt right. There were no warning signs, no conflicts, no moments that made her question whether this was a mistake. Only consistency, only ease, only the quiet confidence that came from choosing something that didn't challenge her in uncomfortable ways. They were married 3 months later. The wedding was exactly what you would expect from Daniel. Elegant, controlled, efficiently planned. Every detail handled, every moment accounted for. There were no surprises, no chaos, no last-minute changes, and Ava moved through it all with the same calm she had carried into everything else, smiling when expected, speaking when necessary, adjusting where needed. She looked beautiful, composed, certain, and everyone who attended said the same thing: they're perfect together. Because from the outside, they were. No visible conflict, no emotional instability, no signs of imbalance, just two people who seemed to understand each other completely. And, in a way, they did. Just not deeply enough. Marriage didn't change their dynamic, it reinforced it. Daniel continued building his world the way he always had, structured, intentional, forward-moving. And Ava fit into it seamlessly. There was no need to argue over decisions, because Daniel made them logically, and Ava rarely saw a reason to disagree. Not because she always agreed, but because disagreement felt unnecessary, complicating something that already worked. "Let me handle that," Daniel would say whenever something came up. And Ava would nod, because he usually did handle it, efficiently, effectively, without creating stress. And slowly, she stopped stepping into those spaces altogether. Not consciously, not intentionally, just gradually. Their life became something people admired, a beautiful home, a well-structured routine, a sense of order that made everything look effortless. They traveled when it made sense, spent time together when schedules allowed, maintained a rhythm that didn't require constant adjustment. And for a while, Ava believed this was what success looked like. A relationship without friction, without emotional unpredictability, without the kind of tension she had grown up avoiding. But something quiet was happening underneath it all. Something neither of them named, because it didn't present itself as a problem. It didn't disrupt their routine. It didn't demand attention. It just existed. Ava started noticing it in small moments. Moments that didn't feel wrong, just incomplete. Like when she had a thought, and chose not to share it. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't seem necessary. Or when something bothered her slightly, but she adjusted before it became worth mentioning. Or when Daniel made a decision that affected both of them, and she agreed before asking herself how she actually felt about it. These weren't big things. They didn't create conflict. They didn't lead to arguments. They just passed, quietly, like everything else. And Daniel saw none of it. Because from his perspective, everything was working. Ava never pushed back unnecessarily, never created problems that didn't need to exist. never introduced emotional complexity into situations that could be solved logically. To him, that wasn't silence. It was strength. It was partnership. It was a relationship functioning exactly the way it should. "You make my life easier," he told her once. Ava smiled. Because that was the goal, wasn't it? To make things easier. To reduce tension. To avoid unnecessary conflict. To create something that felt stable. But ease comes with a cost, and that cost is often invisible at first. It shows up in what isn't said, in what isn't asked, in what isn't explored. And over time, those missing pieces don't disappear. They accumulate. Ava felt it one night more clearly than usual. They were sitting together in the living room, the city lights stretching out beyond the windows. Daniel was reviewing something on his tablet, focused, engaged. Ava watched him for a moment, then looked away. There was something she wanted to say. Not important, not urgent, just something, a thought, a feeling, a question. She wasn't even sure what it was exactly, but it was there, waiting. And for a brief moment, she considered speaking. Then she didn't, because it didn't feel necessary, because it might interrupt him, because it might create a conversation she didn't fully understand how to navigate. So instead, she stayed quiet. And the moment passed. Daniel never noticed, because there was nothing to notice. No interruption, no shift, no signal that anything had been held back. And that's how distance begins, not with conflict, but with absence. Years passed like that, smooth, predictable, efficient, until something entered their lives that couldn't be managed the same way. Something that didn't follow structure, didn't respond to logic, didn't allow for quiet adjustment. The pregnancy. It changed everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in ways that forced things into the open. Ava couldn't ignore her body anymore. Couldn't adjust around discomfort the way she always had. Couldn't quietly manage everything internally. And for the first time in their relationship, something required more than ease. And Daniel started doing something new. Something Ava hadn't seen before. He started trying differently, not just solving problems, but showing up in ways that didn't come naturally to him, like making breakfast. Before we move forward, think about this. Have you ever built something that looked perfect on the outside, but quietly lacked something you couldn't explain? If you have, type. It looked right, because in the next chapter, we're going to step into the part of their story where everything begins to shift, not because something goes wrong, but because something real finally shows up. The first time Ava realized she couldn't control it, she was standing in the middle of her own kitchen. Not Daniel's structured kitchen, not the version of their life that ran on quiet efficiency. Just her, and her body, refusing to cooperate. It started small. A wave of nausea she thought she could manage. She had managed everything else, hadn't she? Uncomfortable conversations, unspoken thoughts, moments that required more honesty than she was ready to give. She always found a way to adjust. So when the feeling rose in her stomach that morning, she treated it the same way. Ignore it, breathe through it, move past it. But this time, it didn't pass. She gripped the edge of the counter, her fingers tightening slightly as the sensation grew stronger. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "It's fine." But her voice didn't sound convincing, and her body didn't respond the way it usually did. The wave didn't settle. It rose. Ava closed her eyes, steadying herself. This wasn't like the other times. This wasn't something she could soften or redirect. This wasn't emotional discomfort. This was physical, immediate, unavoidable. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't have control over how she handled it. She barely made it to the sink. The nausea hit harder than she expected, forcing her to brace herself against the counter. It passed quickly, but not cleanly, not neatly. And when it was over, Ava stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, trying to recover, not just from the physical reaction, but from what it represented. This was different, because this wasn't something she could manage quietly. Not entirely. The pregnancy had already changed things. She knew that. The doctor had explained it. The books had described it. The timelines had predicted it. But none of that prepared her for what it actually felt like. The loss of control, the unpredictability, the way her body demanded attention, whether she was ready to give it or not. Ava turned on the faucet, rinsing her hands slowly, watching the water run over her fingers. She looked at her reflection in the window above the sink. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Not physically, but internally, there was a shift happening, something she hadn't prepared for. Because for the first time, adjusting wasn't enough. Behind her, she heard movement. Footsteps, measured, familiar. Daniel. He stepped into the kitchen, already dressed for the day, his presence filling the space in the same controlled way it always did. "You're up early," he said. Ava nodded slightly, turning off the water. Yeah, he paused, noticing something, not everything, but enough. You okay? A simple question, one she had answered 100 times before, automatically, without thinking. I'm fine. The words came out smoothly, naturally, like they always did. But this time, they weren't true. Daniel studied her for a moment. Not suspicious, just assessing. You don't look fine. Ava forced a small smile. It's just the nausea. It'll pass. That part was true. Eventually it always did, but what she didn't say was, it comes back, again and again, and each time, it feels harder to ignore. Daniel nodded slowly. Did you eat anything? Ava shook her head. Not yet. Okay, he said. You should try something light. It might help. Logical, practical. A solution. And, under normal circumstances, Ava would have followed it without question. Because it made sense. Because it aligned with how Daniel approached everything. But something in her hesitated. Not because she disagreed, but because she wasn't sure she could do it. And for once, that uncertainty wasn't something she could quietly fix. I'll try, she said instead. A soft adjustment. Not a refusal. Not full agreement. Just enough to keep things smooth. Daniel nodded, satisfied. Because from his perspective, the situation had been addressed. Problem identified. Solution suggested. Response given. Everything moving as expected. But as he turned to leave the kitchen, Ava felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not discomfort. Not exactly. Something closer to pressure. Because, for the first time, the gap between what she felt and what she said was becoming harder to maintain. The rest of the morning followed its usual rhythm. Daniel moved through his schedule. Calls, emails, quick decisions made without hesitation. Ava moved more slowly, carefully, listening to her body in a way she wasn't used to. Adjusting, but this time not out of habit, out of necessity. She tried to eat. A piece of toast. Something simple. But halfway through the nausea returned, stronger than before. She set it down, walked away, didn't force it, and that was new. Not forcing something just because it made sense. Not pushing through discomfort just to keep things aligned. By midday, she was tired, not physically exhausted, but mentally. Because managing something you can't control takes more effort than pretending everything is fine. Later that afternoon, she had an appointment, a routine checkup, nothing urgent, just part of the process. Daniel offered to come. I can adjust my schedule, he said. Ava shook her head gently. You don't have to. It's just a checkup. He hesitated. Are you sure? Yeah, she said. I'll be fine. Again, that word, fine. And Daniel accepted it. Because that's what he had always done. He respected what she said. Took her at her word. Didn't push past the surface unless she invited him to. But what neither of them fully understood yet was that Ava didn't always know how to invite someone deeper. The appointment went well. Everything normal. Everything progressing as expected. But on the drive back home, Ava found herself sitting in silence, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, thinking, not about the results, but about something else. For the first time, she felt the weight of what was coming. Not just the baby, but the change, the shift in how her life would function, how her relationship would need to evolve. Because this wasn't something she could handle alone. Not quietly, not by adjusting. And that realization unsettled her. When she got home, the house felt the same. Calm, ordered, predictable. But Ava didn't feel the same inside it. She moved through the space slowly, her steps quieter than usual. Not because she was tired, but because she was thinking about how much of her life had been built on staying comfortable, keeping things easy, avoiding anything that might disrupt the balance. And now, something was disrupting it anyway. Before we continue, I want you to think about this. What happens when life puts you in a situation where your usual way of coping no longer works? When you can't avoid it, can't smooth it over, can't pretend it's fine? If you've ever experienced that shift type, I had to face it. Because in the next part, everything begins to change. Not because Ava decides to be different, but because she no longer has a choice. That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual. Not dramatically early, just earlier than expected. And in a house where everything followed a pattern, even a small shift like that felt noticeable. Ava heard the door before she saw him. The quiet click. The measured footsteps. The familiar rhythm of someone who always knew exactly where he was going. But today, something about it felt different. She was sitting in the living room, a blanket loosely draped over her legs, her body still adjusting to the weight of a day she hadn't fully processed. The nausea had eased, but the fatigue remained. Not just physical, mental. The kind that came from holding too many thoughts at once. Daniel stepped into the room, loosening his tie slightly as he walked in. His eyes found her immediately. "You're resting," he said. It wasn't a question. Ava nodded. "Yeah." He studied her for a moment. Longer than usual. Not in a way that felt intrusive. Just attentive. "You didn't eat much today," he added. Ava blinked slightly. "I tried." "I know," he said. Lila mentioned the toast. A small pause. Not uncomfortable, but noticeable. Because now, there was a third presence in something that had felt private. Not intrusive. Just observed. Ava shifted slightly under the blanket. "It's just been hard to keep anything down," she said. Daniel nodded once. "I've been reading about it." That caught her attention. "You have?" "Yes," he replied simply. "There are ways to manage it, certain foods, timing, small adjustments." Of course. That was how he approached things. Learn, analyze, solve. And normally, Ava would have found comfort in that. But this time, something about it felt different. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. "I can handle it," she said softly. Daniel's expression didn't change. "I'm not saying you can't, but you're trying to fix it." "I'm trying to help," he corrected. A subtle difference, but an important one. Ava looked down at her hands. She wasn't used to this. Not the conversation, not the attention, not the feeling of something being addressed. Daniel stepped closer, his tone shifting slightly. "What do you need?" he asked. The question landed heavier than anything else he had said, because it required something Ava wasn't used to giving. An answer that came from her, not an adjustment, not a deflection, not something designed to keep things smooth, but something real. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because she didn't know how. What did she need? Relief? Support? Understanding? All of it felt vague, unclear, hard to define. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. And that was new. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't rush in with a solution, didn't fill the silence. He just stayed there, present, and for a moment, that presence felt unfamiliar, because Ava wasn't used to sitting in moments that didn't resolve quickly. "I'll figure it out," she added after a second, her voice softer now. That part was familiar, the instinct to take it back, to regain control, to make it manageable again. But Daniel didn't step away from the moment. "Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone," he said. A simple sentence, but it carried something different. Not control, not structure, something closer to partnership. Ava looked up at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, she saw something she hadn't fully recognized before. Effort, not the kind he usually gave. Not efficient, not strategic, just intentional. "I don't want to make things harder," she said quietly. Daniel frowned slightly. Harder than what? Than they need to be. There it was. The belief. The pattern. The rule she had lived by for years. Daniel exhaled slowly, processing that. "Sometimes things are hard," he said. "That doesn't mean you avoid them." Ava didn't respond, because part of her knew he wasn't talking about the nausea anymore. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full, with things unsaid, with things waiting. Daniel glanced toward the kitchen briefly, then back at her. "I'm going to try something," he said. Ava tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "Dinner," he replied. "Something simple, something that might actually work for you." She almost said no. The instinct came quickly, automatic. Don't make him go out of his way. Don't create effort that might not work. Don't risk another moment you can't respond to properly. But this time, she paused, because something in her had started to shift, just slightly. "Okay," she said. And that one word carried more weight than it seemed, because it wasn't just agreement, it was allowance. Daniel nodded once and turned toward the kitchen. And for the first time, he stepped into a space he didn't naturally belong in. Ava stayed where she was, listening. The sounds were unfamiliar. Cabinets opening, utensils moving, the low hum of someone figuring something out as they went. Not perfectly, not efficiently, just trying. And as she sat there, something stirred in her chest. Not discomfort, not resistance. Something softer, more complicated, because this wasn't about solving a problem. This was about showing up, and Ava wasn't sure she knew how to receive that. Minutes passed. Then more. The smell reached her slowly. Different this time. Lighter, less overwhelming. Still present, but not unbearable. She stood carefully, drawn toward the kitchen without fully deciding to move. And, when she reached the doorway, she stopped. Daniel stood at the counter, focused, his sleeves rolled up slightly, his movements less precise than usual. There was no system here, no structured plan, just effort. Real, imperfect effort. For a moment, Ava just watched him. And something about that moment felt important, not because of what he was doing, but because of what it meant. He turned slightly when he noticed her. "I'm trying something simple," he said. "Let's see if it works." Ava nodded slowly. "Okay." And just like that, they were standing in something new, not dramatic, not overwhelming. Just different. Because for the first time in their relationship, Daniel wasn't just fixing. He was trying to connect. And Ava? Ava was standing at the edge of something she had avoided her entire life, receiving it. Before we continue, think about this. What do you do when someone shows up for you in a way you're not used to receiving? Do you accept it? Or do you quietly step away from it without realizing? If you've ever struggled with that type, I didn't know how to receive it. Because in the next chapter, you're going to see the moment that changes everything, the breakfast, and the choice Ava makes. That seems small, but isn't. Before we move on, I want you to be honest with yourself. When someone truly shows up for you, not perfectly, but genuinely, do you receive it? Or do you quietly pull back because you don't know how? If that's ever been you, type, I struggle to receive. And if this story is hitting deeper than you expected, go ahead and like this video and subscribe. Because what happens next, it's a moment most people wouldn't even notice, but it changes everything. The next morning didn't feel important. There was no sign, no warning, no sense that anything significant was about to happen. Just another day. And that's what made it dangerous. Ava woke up slowly, her body heavy in a way she was starting to recognize. Not just tired, resistant. Like every movement required negotiation, she lay still for a moment, one hand resting lightly on her stomach, waiting for the now familiar wave. It came, not as sharp as the day before, but present enough to remind her this wasn't temporary. This was something she had to move with, not around. She sat up carefully, breathed, waited, then stood. The house was quiet, but not empty. There was a different kind of presence this morning, subtle, but noticeable. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard it again. The same sound from the day before, a pan, a cabinet door, movement that didn't belong to routine. Ava stopped. Her body reacted before her mind did. A small tension, a quiet hesitation, because now she knew what it meant. She could turn back. That option presented itself instantly. Go back into the room. Lie down. Avoid the moment entirely. No conversation, no expectation, no need to respond to something she might not be able to handle. And for a second, she almost did. But something held her there. Not curiosity, not obligation, something quieter. Something she didn't fully understand yet. She kept walking. The smell reached her before she entered the kitchen. Softer than yesterday, less intense. But still enough. Enough to trigger the same response. Her stomach tightened. Her throat reacted. Her body reminded her, this is not going to be easy. She paused, just outside the doorway. Just long enough to think, you can handle this. That was the thought. Not because she believed it, but because she needed to. When she stepped inside, Daniel was already there. Same position as the night before, at the counter, focused, trying. He looked up when he noticed her. "Morning, morning," she replied softly. Her voice felt smaller than usual. He glanced at her for a moment, then back at what he was doing. "I kept it lighter today," he said. "Less smell, smaller portions." He said it like he had studied it, like he had adjusted based on data. And Ava felt it again. That quiet pressure. Because this wasn't random anymore. This was intentional. He was paying attention, changing things, trying to meet her where she was. And that meant this moment mattered more. "I appreciate it," she said. And she did. That part was real. Daniel nodded slightly. "Let's see if it works." Ava moved slowly toward the counter. Each step measured, not just physically, but emotionally. Because this wasn't just about eating. This was about responding, about what she would do, with something she might not be able to accept. Daniel placed the plate in front of her. Simpler this time. Plain toast. A small portion of eggs. Tea. Nothing excessive. Nothing overwhelming. Just effort. Adjusted. Ava looked at it. Then, at him. He didn't say anything. Didn't encourage. Didn't push. He just stayed, waiting. That made it harder. She picked up the fork. Her hand steady. Her breathing controlled. Her mind already preparing for what might happen. Just try. That was the goal. Not to succeed. Just to try. She brought the fork closer, slower than necessary, and then it hit her. The smell, the texture, the immediate reaction her body gave without asking permission. Her stomach turned, sharp this time, stronger than she expected. She froze. The fork stopped mid-air, and in that exact moment, everything narrowed. The room, the sound, the presence of Daniel beside her, it all faded into the background, because now, there were only two things left: what she felt, and what she would do about it. She lowered the fork, quickly, quietly. "I can't," she said. The words came out before she could adjust them, before she could soften them, before she could turn them into something easier. And for a brief second, that felt like honesty. Daniel nodded. No disappointment, no frustration, just understanding. "Okay," he said. "Don't force it." Simple, clear, supportive. And that should have been enough, but it wasn't. Because now, the moment didn't end. The food was still there. The effort was still there. The intention was still there. And Ava still had to respond to it. She stared at the plate, then away, then back again. Her body had already made its decision. That part was clear. But her mind was trying to find a way to make everything else easier. Because saying "I can't eat this" was only part of the truth. The harder part was, what do you do with something you can't receive? Daniel stepped back slightly, giving her space, not watching too closely, not making her feel observed. And somehow, that made it even harder, because now, the moment belonged entirely to her. She could leave it. That was one option. Just walk away. Say nothing else. Let it sit. But that didn't feel right. She could explain more, add context, clarify her reaction. But that felt heavy, complicated, unnecessary. Or she could do what she had always done. Handle it. Quietly. Ava exhaled slowly, set the fork down, and in that moment, the decision began forming. Not fully, not consciously. But enough. Before we go further, let me ask you something. When you can't accept something someone gives you, do you explain it? Or do you quietly remove it? So the moment disappears? If you've ever chosen the easier path in a moment like that, type, "I chose the easy way." Because what Ava is about to do next is something many people do without thinking. And it changes more than they expect. The moment didn't end. That was the problem. Ava had said she couldn't eat. Daniel had understood. But the space between them stayed, filled with something unfinished. The plate was still there, the tea untouched, the effort still sitting in front of her, like something waiting to be acknowledged properly. Daniel stepped away, giving her room. "I'll be in the study," he said. "Take your time." Ava nodded. "Okay." And just like that, he left the moment in her hands. The kitchen fell quiet. Too quiet. Ava stood there for a second longer than necessary, looking at the plate, then away, then back again. "Just leave it," a part of her whispered. "It's not a big deal." But something about that didn't sit right. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt incomplete. She picked up the plate, then the cup, then paused. This was the point. The exact point where her decision would form. She could walk to the study, tell him clearly, "I really appreciate it, but I can't eat this right now." That was honest, direct, simple. But the thought of saying it felt heavier than it should have, because it would make the moment real. It would make his effort visible. It would require her to fully acknowledge something she couldn't return. And Ava had never been good at that. So instead, her body moved in the direction it already knew, the hallway. Her steps were slow, not because she was unsure, but because a part of her still recognized this wasn't just routine. It felt routine, but something about it wasn't. She reached the hallway, and there, just like before, was Lila, standing near the console table, tablet in hand, composed, efficient, present. Lila looked up. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale." Ava adjusted her grip on the plate slightly. "Morning." There was a pause. Not long. Just enough. Because this time, the moment felt familiar, and that made it easier. That was the danger. Ava stepped forward. "I can't eat this," she said, her voice soft, controlled. "Would you mind taking it?" Lila didn't reach for it immediately, not like before. There was a brief flicker in her expression, subtle, but there. Because now, this wasn't an isolated moment, this was a pattern. "Of course," Lila said, finally taking the plate. Their hands brushed slightly this time. And for a second, Ava felt something she hadn't expected. Not guilt. Not exactly. Awareness. Like something had just been noticed, not just by Lila, but by herself. "Thank you," Ava added quickly. "You're welcome," Lila replied, but her tone was different. Not unprofessional, not inappropriate, just more careful, and that was enough. Ava turned, walked back down the hallway. The moment was over, handled, resolved, exactly the way she always handled things. But this time, something lingered, because as she stepped back into the bedroom, she realized something small, something easy to miss. She hadn't actually responded to Daniel. Not really. She had removed the situation, but she hadn't completed the moment. And for the first time, that felt different, not wrong, just incomplete. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap, her mind quieter than usual. Because there was nothing to fix, nothing to adjust, nothing to manage. The moment had already passed, and yet it hadn't settled. Later that afternoon, Daniel stepped into the kitchen again, not looking for anything specific, just moving through his space the way he always did. But this time, he noticed something. Not immediately, not obviously, just a detail. The plate, not where he had left it, not in the sink, not where it usually would have been. And Daniel was the kind of man who noticed details. He glanced toward Lila. "Did she eat?" he asked. Lila paused. Not long, but long enough to matter. "No," she said carefully. "She couldn't." That made sense. "But then, she asked me to take it." Another pause. And this one shifted something, not dramatically, not visibly, but internally. Because Daniel wasn't reacting to the action, he was processing the pattern, not what Ava did, but how she did it. He nodded once. "Okay." And that was all he said. But something had changed. Because, for the first time, Daniel didn't just understand the situation. He noticed the distance inside it. That evening felt normal. Dinner was quiet, controlled, predictable, the way it always had been. Ava asked about his day. Daniel answered. Daniel asked about her appointment. Ava responded. Nothing wrong. Nothing broken. Just something slightly out of place, like a conversation that never fully happened. And both of them felt it, but neither of them named it, because naming it would make it real, and real required something different, something neither of them had practiced yet. That night, as Ava lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replayed the moment, not dramatically, not emotionally, just clearly. The plate, the hallway, Lila, and the part she couldn't ignore anymore. She didn't choose honesty. She chose ease, again. And for the first time, she questioned it, not fully, not deeply, just enough. Because something about this time felt different, like the cost had changed, like the moment had meant something. Before we move into the next chapter, I want you to think about this carefully. Have you ever handled a situation so smoothly that you didn't realize you had actually avoided something important? If you have, type, "I avoided it." Because in the next chapter, that small decision is going to come back, not as a fight, not as drama, but as something much more difficult, understanding. Daniel didn't bring it up immediately, not that night, not the next morning, not even the day after that, and for most people, that would have meant nothing. But for Daniel, it meant he was thinking. Because Daniel didn't react impulsively, he observed first, processed second, spoke last. And once something reached that final step, it mattered. Ava felt it before he said anything, not because he acted differently, but because he didn't act normally. There were no changes in routine, no coldness, no distance. Everything looked the same. But something underneath it had shifted. He was paying attention more closely, not in a way that felt invasive, just precise. And Ava, even without realizing why, felt it, that quiet awareness that something had been noticed. It happened 3 evenings later. They were in the living room, the city stretching out beyond the windows, the same place they had sat 100 times before. Daniel was reviewing something on his tablet. Ava was reading, or at least pretending to, because her mind wasn't on the page. It hadn't been for a while. And then, without looking up, Daniel spoke. "You gave the breakfast to Lila." No accusation, no emotion, just a statement. Ava's fingers paused on the edge of the page. For a second, she didn't respond. Not because she didn't hear him, but because she hadn't expected it. Not like this. She looked up slowly. "What?" Daniel lifted his gaze now. Calm, steady. "The breakfast," he said. "You gave it to Lila." There it was. Simple, direct, unavoidable. Ava felt something tighten slightly in her chest. Not fear, not guilt. Something closer to Exposure. I couldn't eat it, she said. That part was true. Daniel nodded. I know. A small pause. And then, I'm not asking why you didn't eat it. Ava frowned slightly. Then what are you asking? Daniel set the tablet down. Completely. That was the shift. I'm asking why you didn't tell me. The room went still. Because that question wasn't about the breakfast. It was about something deeper. Ava held his gaze. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't have an immediate answer, because the truth wasn't simple. I didn't think it was a big deal, she said finally. And she meant it. Daniel studied her. Right, that word again. Agreement without connection. Ava felt it this time. The difference. I wasn't trying to make it into something, she added. I know, Daniel said, and his tone stayed calm, measured, controlled, but something in it had weight. I just thought, he continued, choosing his words carefully, you could have told me directly. Ava exhaled slowly. It felt easier to just handle it. Daniel leaned back slightly. Handle it how? She hesitated. Because now, she had to say it out loud. I didn't want to make it awkward, she admitted. I didn't want to explain something that didn't need explaining. Daniel's gaze didn't leave hers. But you did explain it. Ava blinked. What do you mean? You explained it to Lila, he said. That landed. Not harsh. Not aggressive. Just accurate. Ava looked away briefly. Then back at him. That's different, she said. How? She paused. Because now, she had to define something she had never fully examined. With you, it would have been a conversation, she said slowly. With her, it was just practical. Daniel absorbed that. So you chose practical over honest. Ava felt something shift inside her, because when he said it like that, it didn't sound the way she had always justified it. It wasn't about avoiding honesty, she said quickly. Then what was it about? There it was. The real question. And Ava didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't comfortable. It's just how I handle things, she said finally. If something feels unnecessary or uncomfortable, I make it easier. Daniel nodded slowly, not agreeing, just understanding. And you think that works? It avoids problems. Daniel held her gaze. It avoids connection. Silence. Heavy this time. Because that was the first time someone had said it that clearly, and Ava felt it. Not as an argument, but as recognition. Daniel leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just present. I made the breakfast because I wanted to do something for you, he said. Not because I expected you to eat it. Ava listened, really listened. But when you couldn't, he continued, you didn't tell me. You removed a moment. That word again. Removed. And suddenly, everything about that morning felt different. I didn't think it mattered that much, Ava said quietly. Daniel nodded once. I know. Another pause. But it did, he added. Ava's chest tightened slightly. Why? She asked. And this time, it wasn't defensive. It was genuine. Because she didn't fully understand. Daniel took a breath. Because it wasn't about the food, he said. It was about showing up differently. Ava felt that. And when you handed it off, he continued, you didn't just remove the situation. He paused, just slightly. You removed me from it. That was it. That was the moment everything shifted. Because for the first time, Ava saw it, not what she did, but what it meant. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever avoided a small moment, thinking it didn't matter, only to realize later it meant something to the other person? If you have, type, I see it now. Because in the next part, Ava has to do something she's never truly done before. Stay in the moment. Instead of leaving it, Ava didn't respond right away. Not because she didn't want to, but because for the first time, there was nothing to adjust. No way to smooth it over, no way to redirect it, no way to make the moment smaller. Daniel had said it clearly, and now, it was sitting between them. You removed me from it. Ava swallowed lightly. Her instinct, automatic, familiar, was to soften the moment, to explain it in a way that made it less heavy, to bring it back to something manageable. But this time, she didn't, because something in her had shifted. Just enough. I didn't realize that, she said quietly. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't an excuse. It was the truth. Daniel studied her, not challenging, not pushing, just listening. Ava exhaled slowly, her hands resting loosely in her lap. I thought I was making it easier, she continued. For both of us. Daniel nodded once. I know. That response caught her slightly off guard. You do? She asked. Yes, he said. That's the pattern. Pattern. That word settled deeper than anything else, because it meant this wasn't just about one moment. It meant this had been happening for a long time. Ava looked down briefly, then back at him. I've always handled things that way, she admitted. If something feels uncomfortable, I fix it before it becomes a problem. Daniel leaned back slightly. And in the process, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ava did it for him. I don't actually deal with it, she said. Silence. But not empty silence. Understanding. And that was new. Because this wasn't a disagreement. It was recognition. Ava shifted slightly, her voice softer now. I didn't even think of it as avoiding anything, she said. It just felt normal. Daniel nodded. That's usually how patterns work. Not judgment, just clarity. And for the first time, Ava didn't feel the need to defend herself, because something about this moment felt different. It wasn't about being right. It was about seeing something she hadn't seen before. I think I've been doing that with you too, she said slowly. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, slightly more attentive. In what way? He asked. Ava hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because answering meant saying something real, and that still felt unfamiliar. I don't always say what I'm actually thinking, she admitted. If something feels small or unnecessary, I just let it go. Daniel held her gaze. And you think it's small because, he prompted. Ava paused. Because now she had to go deeper. Because I don't want to make things harder, she said. There it was again. That belief. Daniel nodded slightly. But sometimes, the small things are the things that matter. Ava felt that. Not as a correction, but as something she had never fully considered. I thought keeping things easy was a good thing, she said. It is, Daniel replied. Ava looked up. But not at the cost of honesty, he added. That landed. Because, for the first time, she could see the trade-off. Ease had replaced expression, and she hadn't even noticed. Ava leaned back slightly, her mind moving through moments she hadn't paid attention to before. The times she agreed without thinking. The times she stayed quiet when something felt off. The times she adjusted instead of asking. None of them felt significant on their own. But together, they formed something. Distance. And she had called it peace. I didn't think it was creating distance, she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He let the moment sit. Then, it wasn't obvious, he said. Ava looked at him. What do you mean? It didn't feel like distance, he explained. It felt like everything was working. A small pause. But something was missing, he added. Ava felt that in a way she couldn't ignore. Because she had felt it too. She just hadn't named it. What was missing? She asked. Daniel held her gaze. You. That was it. Simple, but complete. Ava's chest tightened slightly. Not from discomfort, but from recognition, because suddenly, all those quiet moments weren't invisible anymore. I didn't know how to show up differently, she said. And for the first time, that sentence didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like honesty. Daniel nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said. Not dismissing it, not minimizing it, just acknowledging it. The room felt different now. Not tense, but open. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. Because this was new territory. No structure, no clear solution, no immediate resolution. Just two people, sitting in something real. I don't want to keep doing that, Ava said finally, her voice steady, not perfect, but intentional. Daniel didn't respond right away, not because he didn't have something to say, but because he was choosing how to respond differently too. You don't have to change everything at once, he said. Ava looked at him. Just don't leave the moment, he added. That stayed with her, because it wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about staying, even when it felt uncomfortable, even when it felt unnecessary, even when it would be easier to walk away. Ava nodded slowly. I can try that, she said. And this time, that word meant something different, not an adjustment, an effort. Daniel gave a small nod. And just like that, the conversation didn't end with a solution. It ended with understanding. Later that night, as Ava lay in bed, her mind didn't race the way it usually did. It moved differently, more focused, more aware, because now she could see it, the pattern, the way she had been stepping out of moments without realizing it, and for the first time, she asked herself a different question. What would happen if I stayed? Before we move into the final chapter, I want you to think about this. What is one small moment in your life that you walked away from instead of staying in it? If something comes to mind, type, I would do it differently now. Because in the next chapter, Ava gets another moment, not a dramatic one, a small one. But this time, she chooses differently, and that changes everything. The next morning looked ordinary, no tension in the air, no lingering heaviness from the conversation the night before, just quiet, familiar, controlled. But Ava felt the difference, not around her, within her, because for the first time, she was aware of something she used to do without thinking, leaving moments. She sat at the edge of the bed for a few seconds longer than usual, her hands resting lightly on her lap, listening. The house was calm. But then, there it was, a sound she now recognized. The kitchen, a pan, a cabinet, movement. Ava closed her eyes briefly. This was it. Not a big moment. Not dramatic, not important on the surface. But it felt like one. Because now, she knew what it meant. Another attempt, another effort, another opportunity to either stay or leave. And for the first time, she didn't move immediately. She sat there, letting the moment exist. Her body reacted first, the familiar discomfort, the hesitation, the quiet resistance rising in her stomach. She knew how this would go. She would walk in. She would try. She wouldn't be able to eat. And then, she paused. No. Not this time. That thought didn't come loudly. It came quietly, but clearly, not this time. Ava stood slowly, not rushing, not avoiding, just moving forward. When she stepped into the hallway, everything felt sharper, more defined. The light, the silence, the space between her and the kitchen. Because now, she wasn't moving on autopilot. She was choosing. The smell reached her. Still there, still uncomfortable, still something her body didn't want. But this time, she didn't turn away from it. She kept walking. Daniel stood at the counter again. Same posture, same focus, but something about him felt different too. Not because he had changed dramatically, but because now, there was awareness between them. He looked up as she entered. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Her voice was steady, not forced, not adjusted, just present. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the plate. "I kept it simple again," he said. Ava nodded. "Thank you." And this time, she didn't just say it. She meant it, and she let it show. Daniel placed the plate in front of her, same as before, but not the same, because the moment had changed. Ava looked at it, then at him, and instead of rushing, instead of performing, instead of trying to make it work, she said it, immediately. "I might not be able to eat this." The words were soft, but clear, and they didn't come with apology or hesitation, just honesty. Daniel paused, then nodded. "That's okay." No confusion, no distance, no missing piece. Because this time, the moment was complete. Ava exhaled slowly, and something shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Because for the first time, she didn't feel the need to fix anything. She picked up the cup instead, took a small sip of the tea. It stayed down. A small win. But more than that, it felt different, because she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just there. Daniel leaned slightly against the counter. "Is there something that might work better?" he asked. Ava thought about it. Not quickly, not automatically, actually thinking. "Maybe something colder," she said. "Less smell." Daniel nodded. "Okay." And that was it. A conversation. Simple. Complete. No adjustment. No avoidance. No missing pieces. Ava felt it. The difference, not in what happened, but in how it happened. Because the moment didn't disappear this time. It stayed. And so did she. Later that morning, as she moved through the house, something else felt different. The space, not physically, but emotionally. Because there was no leftover tension. No unfinished moment sitting quietly in the background. No sense that something had been removed instead of addressed. It was still the same house, but it felt more open. And Ava realized something small, something she had never noticed before. Honesty didn't make things harder. It made them clearer. Before we continue to the final part, I want you to pause and think about this. How many moments in your life could have been different if you had just said the truth earlier? If that question hits you, type, "I'll stay next time." Because in the final part, we're going to see what happens when small changes start to rebuild something bigger. Not perfectly, but honestly, it didn't turn everything into a perfect marriage. That wasn't what changed. There were still moments, small ones, where Ava hesitated, where the old instinct rose quietly, keep it easy, don't make it a thing. And sometimes, she still felt it pulling at her, but now, she recognized it, and recognition changes everything. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened the same way the distance had happened, quietly, in small choices. A few days later, they were sitting at the dining table. Dinner, simple and calm. Daniel was talking about something from work, a decision, a timeline, a strategy. Normally, Ava would have listened, nodded, agreed. But this time, something in what he said didn't sit right, not wrong, just not aligned with how she saw it. And the moment appeared, small, easy to ignore, easy to pass. She felt it, the hesitation, the familiar pause. And, for a second, she almost let it go. It's not important. That thought came automatically. But this time, she didn't move past it. She stayed. I see it a little differently, she said. The words felt unfamiliar, but steady. Daniel stopped, looked at her, not surprised, just attentive. How? He asked. Ava exhaled softly, not to prepare, but to stay grounded. I think it might need more time, she said. Not because it's wrong, but because it affects more than just the outcome. A small pause. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Explain that. And just like that, the moment opened, not into conflict, but into conversation. And Ava felt something she hadn't expected. Not tension, but presence. Because this time, she hadn't removed herself. She had stepped in, and Daniel met her there. That became the difference. Not that they suddenly understood everything perfectly, but that they stopped missing each other in small moments. Daniel started asking more, not just about decisions, but about her. What do you think? How does that feel to you? Is there something I'm not seeing? Questions he hadn't needed before, because before, there had been no reason to ask. And Ava started answering, not perfectly, not always clearly, but honestly. And that changed the rhythm of everything, even in the quiet moments, like mornings. 1 week later, Daniel made breakfast again. Not because he was trying to fix something, but because now, it had become something shared. Ava walked into the kitchen. The smell still there, still not easy. But this time, she smiled slightly. I'll try something small, she said. Daniel nodded. No expectation, no pressure, just space. She took a small bite, paused, waited. It didn't sit perfectly, but it stayed, and she laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because it felt real. I think that's my limit, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. Then that's enough. And that was the difference. Not forcing, not avoiding, just meeting in the middle. Later that day, Ava found herself in the hallway again. Lila passed by, tablet in hand. Good morning, Mrs. Hale. Morning, Ava replied. And for a brief second, she thought about that morning, the tray, the silence, the pattern, and how easily she had stepped out of the moment. But this time, she didn't feel the need to correct it, because she wasn't living there anymore. Growth didn't erase the past. It just changed what came next. That evening, Ava stood by the window, looking out at the city, her hand resting gently on her stomach. The future felt closer now. Not just the baby, but the life they were building. And, for the first time, it didn't feel like something she had adjusted into. It felt like something she was part of. Daniel stepped beside her. Quiet, present. You okay? He asked. Ava nodded. Yeah. And this time, that word was true. She turned slightly toward him. Thank you, she said. Daniel looked at her. For what? Ava held his gaze. For staying in the moment, even when I didn't. A small pause. Then, I'm learning to stay too. Daniel nodded. And, for a moment, nothing else needed to be said, because love wasn't what she thought it was. It wasn't ease. It wasn't the absence of discomfort. It wasn't how smoothly two people could move around each other without friction. It was this, showing up, staying, telling the truth, even when it felt unnecessary, even when it felt small, even when it would be easier not to, because, in the end, it was never about the breakfast. It was about the moment she almost ignored, and the choice to finally stay in it. Before we close this story, I want to leave you with something simple. The next time you find yourself in a small moment, one that feels easy to ignore, easy to smooth over, easy to walk away from, pause, because that might be the moment that matters. If this story made you reflect even a little, type "small moments matter." And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, because sometimes the quietest stories teach us the loudest truths. Before you leave, I want you to think about this honestly. What's one small moment in your life that you've been avoiding? something you told yourself didn't matter. But deep down, you know it did? If this story made you see things differently, type "small moments matter." And if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but stay with you, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. Because sometimes, the smallest choices shape the biggest parts of our lives.